Indonesia's growing interest in Italy's retired aircraft carrier, Giuseppe Garibaldi, has created an unexpected moment of strategic reflection across the Indo-Pacific. What began as a simple discussion around the disposal of an aging Italian ship has evolved into a much larger debate about Indonesia's future naval trajectory. Whether it remains a primarily archipelagic, near-shore defense force, or whether it begins the long transition toward a true blue water posture. The possibility of Jakarta acquiring the Garibaldi offers a rare window into the choices Indonesia must make in the coming decade. The ship itself is not a mystery. Commissioned in the 1980s, the Giuseppe Garibaldi served the Italian Navy for decades as a light aircraft carrier and later as a helicopter carrier. With a displacement of around 14,000 tons, a ski-jump configured flight deck, and a hangar capable of carrying between 12 and 16 helicopters or vertical takeoff aircraft, it represented a pragmatic European approach to naval aviation. Italy retired the ship as the Navy shifted its capital investments toward the larger Cavour and the multi-role Trieste. And, as with many retired European vessels, the question became who might be interested in taking over the hull. Indonesia's appearance in this conversation was not accidental. For years, Jakarta has quietly explored ways to upgrade its maritime reach, especially in response to external pressure points such as the Natuna region and the growing presence of Chinese naval forces. Indonesia does not have a carrier program, nor does it operate fixed-wing naval aviation. But it does have a strategic desire to elevate its regional standing, and a platform like the Garibaldi, even with limitations, would serve as an unmistakable symbol of ambition. For a government eager to project decisiveness and national pride, this kind of symbolism carries weight. However, the deeper analysis begins once the surface-level excitement fades. A ship like the Garibaldi is not only a hull, it is an entire ecosystem. Indonesia would have to answer fundamental questions about what aircraft or unmanned systems the ship is meant to carry. The original Italian configuration operated AV-8B Harrier jump jets, but Indonesia does not possess these aircraft, and acquiring them now would border on impractical. What remains are helicopters and drones. In reality, a hypothetical Indonesian Garibaldi would function as a helicopter and unmanned aviation platform, not a traditional carrier. That is entirely viable, but it changes the purpose of the ship. A helicopter-centric Garibaldi could offer Indonesia a dramatic increase in anti-submarine warfare capability at a time when submarine activity in the region is intensifying. Airborne dipping sonar, lightweight torpedoes, and persistent unmanned surveillance would allow Indonesia to map and monitor undersea activity around the Natuna Sea far more effectively than today. This alone could justify acquiring a ship of this type. The second mission, humanitarian assistance and disaster response, fits Indonesia's national profile even more naturally. In a country regularly struck by earthquakes, tsunamis, and regional emergencies, a light carrier doubling as an amphibious and relief platform would be immensely useful. The ship's aviation facilities, medical spaces, and deck capacity align perfectly with Southeast Asia's recurring need for rapid crisis response. The third mission set, arguably the most interesting, would be the development of a drone-first naval aviation capability. Italy is already moving toward integrating more advanced unmanned systems into the Cavour and Trieste. Indonesia, which lacks both the historical baggage and the infrastructure of a large carrier air wing, could leapfrog into a next-generation model where unmanned systems dominate flight deck operations. Vertical takeoff drones, rotary wing unmanned surveillance systems, and eventually medium-sized strike-capable unmanned systems could all be tested and matured aboard a platform like the Garibaldi. In strategic terms, this would give Indonesia something far more valuable than prestige. It would give Jakarta a pathway into the future of naval aviation without the overwhelming costs that accompany fixed-wing carrier operations. But these advantages come with undeniable constraints. The Garibaldi is not a modern ship by Indo-Pacific standards. Its radar suite, combat management system, and electronic warfare gear are outdated. Indonesia would need to replace several major systems, likely with Italian technology such as the Kronos radar series, to make the vessel tactically relevant. These upgrades might cost more than the acquisition of the hull itself. Then there is the challenge of training. Operating a flight deck safely and efficiently requires years of institutional knowledge. Nations like Brazil, Turkey, and Thailand have all struggled with maintaining the specialized skills needed to run even light carriers. Indonesia would need to invest heavily in training pipelines and long-term human capital. Maintenance is another major variable. The Garibaldi was built for the relatively mild conditions of the Mediterranean, not the salt-heavy, humid, and high-temperature environment of the Indonesian archipelago. Corrosion, steel fatigue, and machinery degradation would all accelerate. Engineering, spare parts, and repair capacity must be assessed realistically. Without a serious logistical plan, the ship could become more burden than asset. Yet even with these challenges, the strategic implications are profound. Indonesia acquiring Garibaldi would shift the psychological balance of Southeast Asia. It would signal that Indonesia sees itself as a regional power with expeditionary responsibilities. For Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines, the appearance of a functioning Indonesian aviation-capable flagship would force a re-evaluation of naval modernization plans. For China, it would represent the gradual emergence of a more confident Indonesia, one that is harder to intimidate through incremental pressure. For Europe, and especially for Italy, such a deal would deepen industrial and political ties. Italy's shipbuilder, Fincantieri, is already expanding its footprint in Indonesia. A major deal involving the Garibaldi could pave the way for future co-production of frigates, amphibious ships, and unmanned systems. A stronger Italy-Indonesia axis in naval procurement would diversify Southeast Asia's partners and weaken the near monopoly historically held by a handful of other suppliers. By 2035, if Indonesia used the Garibaldi as a stepping stone rather than a destination, the country could possess a far more capable maritime aviation force. A new generation of amphibious assault ships, a mature drone naval ecosystem, and a network of naval bases configured for aviation operations could all emerge from this initial investment. In this sense, the Garibaldi is less about raw power and more about transforming Indonesia's maritime mindset. The core question, then, is not whether the ship is perfect, because it is certainly not. The real question is whether Indonesia sees itself evolving into a regional navy that projects power, protects sea lanes, and shapes events beyond its immediate coastline? If the answer is yes, then the Garibaldi is not merely an old Italian hull. It is a catalyst. It is a signal. It is the first chapter of a much longer story about Indonesia's arrival as a maritime power in the Indo-Pacific.